When I was in college, I used to live in this small apartment just off campus. It was more expensive than the dorms, but it meant that I didn't have to share with anyone I didn't know, or more importantly, didn't like. I was very protective of my personal space, and I'd heard horror stories about people sharing rooms that didn't get along. It was getting close to Christmas, and we were all about to go home for the holidays, so we decided to celebrate by having a party at one of my friend's dorms on campus. We were able to get some alcohol, but I was never one to get wasted, as I didn't like to feel the hangover the next day, but I would have a couple of drinks. Towards the end of the party, I decided to go home. I let my friends know I was heading home, and Tristan and Sam offered to walk me back to my apartment. Tristan and Sam were boyfriend and girlfriend. I wasn't Tristan's biggest fan at the time, as he could be a bit boisterous, and that wasn't really me, but he was a good guy deep down. Even though I said I was fine to make the journey alone, as it was less than 10 minutes away, my friends insisted and wouldn't allow me to walk home alone. I hadn't really noticed, but the snow had started coming down hard while we were all inside partying, and it was laying fast. Tristan threw some snowballs at other passing students, and they threw them back. It was a bit of fun, but as we got closer to the houses, Tristan decided to throw some snowballs at some of the residential windows. Both me and Sam told him not to, but he continued anyway. He then threw one snowball so hard that it shattered the glass of someone's window. Tristan and Sam started to run off, but I was more concerned that he could have hurt someone sleeping. I looked up to see a man walk to the window. He didn't turn on any lights, so I couldn't really see his face. He looked at me and pointed right at me, and then turned around to walk away. I started to run to catch up with Tristan and Sam. We managed to get to my apartment without him seeing us, and we decided it was best to lay low for a while. We left all the lights off and sat on the floor out of sight. A few minutes later, a rock came through my window.
"Come down here and pay for what you've done!"
I was confused as to how he managed to find us. He was nowhere in sight when we got back to my place. We looked out of the window from behind the curtains to see all the footprints leading up to the front door. It never even occurred to me, but as it was late at night, there were no other footprints in the snow, so it wasn't hard to find us. We couldn't really call the cops as we'd broken his window. The man started to kick the door repeatedly. I shouted at Tristan to do something, but before he could react, we heard the door give way. I didn't know what to do. We had nowhere to go as we all panicked. We heard the man coming up the stairs one step after another. He came down the hall and stopped outside my living room door. We all just stood still looking at each other. There was nothing we could do. Then the man turned the doorknob and slowly opened the door. As the man opened the door, he looked right at me. He was holding a small kitchen knife. My heart dropped. Tristan stood forward and told the man it was him that broke his window. The man laughed and slowly turned his head towards Tristan, and then lunged at him, pinning him against the wall while holding the knife to his throat. Sam and I both screamed and started to cry, while Tristan stood there pinned against the wall.
"Midday tomorrow. Don't be late."
The man took the knife from Tristan's throat and walked out of the flat laughing as he walked down the stairs. The next morning we went with Tristan to the ATM and went to the house to drop off $200. We knocked on the door, and an old lady answered.
"Are you the ones who broke my window?"
Tristan told her that he'd broken it by throwing a snowball too hard. The lady laughed and didn't seem angry. She seemed very sweet, in fact.
"Never mind. At least you left a note and came back to pay for it."
"What note?" The lady handed me a note that said, "I'm sorry we broke your window. We'll return tomorrow before midday to pay for it." We asked where the man that lived here was, and if she'd make sure he knew we came back to pay for it.
"What man?"
she asked.
"I live alone."
We never saw that man again after that. I don't know if they were messing with our heads, but if not, who was that man, and why was he in her house? Me and my little sister used to go sledding whenever it would snow. There was a local golf course near our house, and whenever it would snow, all the kids would go there. The golf course was built on a rather big hill, which made it perfect for sledding. The club members would chase us if they saw us, as the sleds would damage the grass, which would affect their game. As kids, this just made it all the more exciting, because they would come out of the club and chase us as we set off down the hill. We would laugh at them as we raced down the hill at top speed. This one night, me and my sister and a couple of our friends decided to sneak out of the house and go to the club while no one else was there. We got to the top of the biggest hill, which we used to call the Elephant's Back, because it would just drop off at the end and there was no turning back. We lined up our sleds. My sister was in with me, and my two friends each had their own. We set off first, and my two friends followed. As we were just starting to pick up speed, my sister pointed to a man that was running out from the trees at the side of the hill. We rushed past, narrowly missing him, but my friend Jermaine was not so lucky. I didn't see what happened, but it looked like he tackled him somehow, taking him off his sled. We were going too fast to stop and ended up at the bottom of the hill. His sled came sliding down, but Jermaine was nowhere to be seen. We ran up the side of the hill through the trees, which was easier because the tree roots would allow you to get a footing. As we got halfway up, we found Jermaine sitting against a tree crying, but with no sign of the man. He wouldn't talk about what happened, and when we got home we told our parents, who called the police. The club claimed the man had nothing to do with them and must have been someone just hiding in the trees. They never did find the guy, and Jermaine never told us what the man actually did to him. This happened close to 20 years ago. My dad had recently been touring South Africa with one of his friends, but he returned early due to a disagreement with the friend he was touring with. After staying with me for a couple of weeks, he decided he wanted to go and stay at a Buddhist commune up in the mountains. This place was a 2-hour drive from my house, an hour on the highway and an hour on the small back roads leading up into the mountains. As he didn't have a car, he asked me to drive him up there, as there wasn't any public transport that went that far into the mountains. I agreed, and we left early in the afternoon. Foolishly, neither of us checked the weather forecast, and it started to snow just as we were getting to the mountains. The further up the mountains we got, the harder the snow began to fall. I was still relatively new to driving at the time, and certainly wasn't experienced enough to be driving up the mountains with inches of snow on the road. I was confident that there wouldn't be any snowplows out there, and even more confident that if we had an accident or slid off the road, that no one would be coming to rescue us anytime soon. It's likely they wouldn't have found us for at least a week, and we would probably have been 2 frozen corpses by then. We were within 15 minutes of the commune when we came across a small sign that pointed up what appeared to be a steep, rocky hill. This was far too steep for most vehicles, and certainly too steep for any vehicle in the snow. In the middle of nowhere, we had 2 options: keep going along the main road, hoping it led somewhere, or attempt the hill. The steep hill appeared to have no wall on either side, and the further up it went, the bigger the drop off the side appeared. We decided to continue driving and see what we could find. We drove no further than 5 minutes along the road when we saw a sign advertising a bed and breakfast just up ahead. We couldn't believe our luck. We called in and asked if there were any beds left for the night. The nice old lady there welcomed us into the warmth and said she had 2 single rooms left, which she would be happy to let us have for the price of a twin room. She told us she would need an hour to make them up, as she wasn't expecting any more guests for the evening. To be honest, it didn't look like anyone else was there. There were no cars in the parking lot. No one else sat in the communal living room, but hey, we were safe and in the warmth. The lady told us there was a small bar just down the road, easily within walking distance, even in the snow, and we could get a hot meal down there. My dad and I walked to the bar, and when we walked in, the entire room looked at us as if we were aliens. It was an old traditional bar with a few deer heads hung up on the wall and a roaring fire blazing in the corner. We asked for a hot food menu and were told that the kitchen was closed, but they offered us a sandwich which we accepted. We sat there for an hour or so, had a couple of beers, and headed back up to the bed and breakfast. Upon arrival, the lady took us to my dad's room, which was nice and clean, had a TV and wardrobe, all the essentials you would expect, and then she said she had something special for me. This lady took me into what appeared to be a child's room. I was thinking maybe she had no beds left and just gave me her grandson's room or something. The room was painted blue and had curtains with some kind of dinosaurs on them. There was no wardrobe or chest of drawers, just an old leather chair next to the bed. I was too tired to care in all honesty, so I undressed and threw my clothes onto the floor before climbing into bed in my underwear. I wasn't planning on staying overnight, so had no other clothes with me. I fell asleep as soon as I turned out the light. It had been a longer than expected drive, especially with all the stress of the snow. I'm not certain what time it was, but maybe a few hours after I fell asleep, I awoke to a creaking sound. It sounded like it was in my room, but I wasn't 100% certain. I looked around the room and couldn't really see anything, and I soon fell asleep again. What felt like a short time later, the woman who ran the bed and breakfast was standing next to my bed and leaning over me. I couldn't really see her face, but I knew it was her. She had a peculiar smell which I'd only smelt on her a few hours ago. She told me to go back to sleep, and everything would be okay as she walked out of the room. Obviously, I couldn't go back to sleep, and lay there for most of the night with my eyes wide open. I must have nodded off again, as I later woke to my dad knocking on the door to my room. I jumped out of bed, weirded out at the fact that I'd fallen asleep again, and as I went to grab my clothes off the floor, I noticed that they'd all been washed and folded, and were neatly placed on the chair next to my bed. Maybe she was just doing a nice thing, but it was still weird and really creeped me out. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.